Congressman Brad Wenstrup in studio for the full hour. And welcome back, Congressman Wenstrup. Gee, it's too bad we have nothing to talk about.
I know. What are we going to do? What are we going to do later?
I have no idea. We'll have to go out and make up controversies and problems for the world because, they've all been solved. Speaking of which, real quick, I just got done mentioning, I had retired Colonel Todd Mayer on the program earlier about the event you're doing at Gate of Heaven tomorrow in honor of the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. Get it out, Brian.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's always a great chance to honor our Vietnam veterans. I think we will continue to owe them much honor that they never got when they came home, unfortunately. And really for the fine work that they did in many ways. It was a very difficult challenge. But, it's interesting, too, Brian, because I've now been to Vietnam twice in the last year. And it's amazing. There's a monument to John McCain.
Yeah.
Although one thing that's kind of interesting in the Navy, Army, Air Force fights, they list him as an Air Force pilot, which he was not. He was a Navy pilot.
That's funny.
Yeah, but that's on their monument. Well, but they love America right now. I mean, so
put
it's a
some
good
generations behind us. There, there's no longer the men in the black pajamas. And they've got a modern, thriving society now, don't they? I mean,
they really
they're
do.
A trading partner with us now.
Yeah, and we have a common adversary in China, so that doesn't hurt things
crazy?
Either. Yeah, it really is.
Fought tooth and nail with them and ended up inuring to their benefit. Us leaving didn't hurt anything. Yeah. And whatever happened to the red wave that was going to cross the globe in the aftermath of our pulling out of Vietnam? I just go directly. You asked me what I wanted to start off with in terms of broader topics, but the speaker's race was another optically disappointing thing for the Republican Party. Kind of reminds me of Columbus and the Ohio Republicans. They can't seem to get their act together. They just you think you got an entirely red state, and some of the things they do don't make any sense to me. And the removal of the prior speaker seemed to me to be a bad idea. There didn't seem to be any game plan in place. There was no person that was the guy or gal, as the case may be, that was going to rise and accept be the unanimous person for Speaker of the House. Here you got Mike Johnson, who most of my listeners, I don't think, had any idea who this guy is, or still don't have any idea who this guy is. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And what of the optics of all this?
Well, let's hope for a good thing, right? But, Mike's a worker bee, and there are people in Congress that you never hear of. At one point, Austin Scott was getting in the race, and one of the members, Lauren Boebert, says, well, I never even heard of Austin Scott. You know why? Because he goes to work every day and he shows up for his committees and he does his job. He's on Intelligence Committee with me. I guess you don't know who he is, but I've been on Armed Services with him. He is a guy who comes and goes to work. And when he actually sat up there in the debate, he did a good job, and he knew his topics. And, that's a challenging thing. Sometimes you're mired in your committee and you don't really know what's going on in the other committees. He had a good range of knowledge, and so does Mike Johnson. He was vice chair of the conference, and he just quietly did his work and was on top of everything all the time. He's a very bright guy. I think he's a superb choice. The things he said in his acceptance speech were just spot on. We've got to address getting our job done with appropriations. Right. That's one. But we have to address the border, the conflicts around the world, and our debt. And that relates to the people at home in every single way. And he invoked Ronald Reagan and the 7 things that he said were the conservative values and tenets, which is individual freedom, limited government, rule of law, peace through strength, fiscal responsibility, free markets, and human dignity. That pretty much covers what we're about.
That's all
it?
I need. Yeah, that's it. Just pull the plug on everything else.
Yeah. So we're going to have challenges. Whenever you are in the majority in the House of Representatives, especially a slim majority, you're going to have to accept that there are people that won as conservatives in districts that other conservatives never could win there. And I'm talking about New York, for example. We won seats in New York, that Biden won by 20 points. And so they're serving their district. There's going to be some nuances that are different than, say, my district or Jim Jordan's district.
Well, and you brought up Jim Jordan. I think he would have been a great speaker. He's demonstrably competent at what he does. I mean, that guy, if he's on a topic, he knows the topic. And what was so wrong with him? I mean, I don't understand why Jim Jordan isn't currently the speaker. Because some people were saying, well, there's some places in close races that the Republicans never win, and we were able to get that seat. And if a vote for Jordan is going to translate to a seat taken over back by the Democrats, I'm thinking to myself, oh, come on. How many weed dwellers are there out there? How many people are scorekeepers for the Speaker of the House? Mm-hmm. Most people don't even know what the Speaker of the House does on a day-to-day basis. What's wrong with Jim Jordan? What was the problem behind the scenes with him?
Well, I mean, I think for some people, I mean, if you watch the floor votes, I voted for Jim Jordan every time, and I think all of us from Ohio did, for certain. But there were some things that I think he wished he had done differently during the process. Because remember, in the initial round, it was really between Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise. Steve Scalise got more votes. Now, I've always taken the approach that I keep my vote private in conference, and I've done this since John Boehner. Mm-hmm. So I've had the opportunity several times, Paul Ryan, et cetera. I keep my vote private in conference. We are the constituents in this race, by the way. The members of Congress, and particularly the Republican members of Congress, we are the constituents. And Steve Scalise won, and for some, that wasn't acceptable. And I think that Jim looked at that and said, I think that we need to get to 218 votes. And that's legitimate. That is a legitimate concern. But that's when the whole thing started to spiral in other directions, because typically what I've seen since I've been in Congress is that whoever wins in conference, pretty much everyone goes to the floor and votes for that person, because that's what the conference decided. That's what the majority wanted.
Right.
We don't have that type of conference right now. And so, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But we don't have that type of conference right now. And so there were some that was like, well, that's not who won. So why are we doing this? And so we went finally till we got to somebody that could get everyone on board.
Well, I guess the conference is like a primary, and the winner in the conference is the declared victor of the primary. And if you're a Republican going into a fall election, your guy maybe didn't win in the primary. The other guy is on the ballot. Are you going to vote for him or not? I mean, that's really the scenario that played out, right?
Yeah, and since people weren't willing to accept it that way, then this is this is how it played out.
And that's where the optics fall apart. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. To the average person who's not a weed dweller, they just hear about dysfunction. They hear about, on day 21 with no Speaker of the House elected, Republicans are still in conference, can't seem to get their act together. It just, generally speaking, as a soundbite, which is what most people consume, it just made the Republicans look bad.
Yeah, but we actually elected
twice.
We have a lot of good people, so we actually elected several people as the speaker nominee, but it didn't sell with the whole conference, and people were willing to take it down as a result. And finally, we got to somebody that really is a uniter, and I think that Mike Johnson will be able to do that. And he's very conservative.
Oh, that I noted. Yeah. Yes, I mean he's got his conservative credentials, in stone.
Right,
and that obviously was a problem for some people. I mean, the never Trumper types. I mean, Trump, he enjoys Trump's support. He supported him during the election contest. And so, certain factions within the Republican Party, that's a non-starter.
Well, Mike took care of a lot of the communications involving all members in communications and giving floor speeches and things like that. And so he's really gotten to know everybody in the conference through that, and in a positive way. They all know him in a positive way, where he's promoting all the members of conference. Sounds
like you feel good about Mike Johnson, and that's good enough for me. Let's pause.
Tough job.
We'll talk about war coming up next with Congressman Brad Wenstrup. Hey, Congressman Brad Wenstrup in studio. Pivoting away from the Speaker of the House and over to global conflict. I mentioned to you in the break there, and I feel like they are intentionally sucking us in. I mean, Iran via Hezbollah, Hamas, or whatever other faction you want to talk about. Ukraine, the proxy war we got going on with Russia at the same time. And then now it's getting white hot in the South China Sea with China. There's no way we can fund three fronts and three wars. I mean, whether or not we got boots on the ground, we would in the South China Sea, but looking at the situation in the Middle East and in Europe, we're broke, Congressman Wenstrup. Spring from that proposition.
Yeah. No, we just talked about that. That was one of our goals is to start reducing our debt. And it's the forces of evil. It's the big four. It's Russia, China, and
Iran
and North Korea. And so we're kind of, it's 1,000 pinpricks, right? But it's actually bigger than that. But look, bottom line is America right now does not project strength. We project weakness. The withdrawal from Afghanistan was one of the greatest indicators of that, because we not only did that, we left Americans behind, we left our equipment behind, we left those that helped us behind, even though we promised them they could come with us at the end of the day. And so this is a huge problem that we face across the front. So right now, for example, the Biden administration wants to put forward just this large funding for Ukraine, Israel, putting them together. We want to separate them out in the House. Republicans in the House want these to be separate, and that's the approach that I think that we're going to take. And we've already heard the new speaker mention that in one of his first interviews last night. So I will tell you, the frustration with Ukraine has been, and this is even before the Israeli conflict began, was that in Ukraine, the president and the administration just say, well, we're in this for as long as it takes. As long as it takes for what end?
To do what? Yeah.
There's no end. And what we are used to in America, especially people our age, is you have a president that sits in the Oval Office and addresses the American people as to what we are doing and why we are doing it. Why are we going into Grenada? Why are we going into Iraq? From Kuwait, all of those types of things explained to us by the commander-in-chief or the secretary of defense or chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Someone is explaining the strategy here. That isn't happening. It's just money. I sat with a group that included Republicans and Democrats, and one of the Democrats from Armed Services Committee said, Republicans are just using as an excuse to try and spend less by saying that the commander-in-chief isn't telling us enough. There were liberal members of the parliament from UK in this discussion. Mm-hmm. And when Mike Turner, head of the Intelligence Committee from Ohio, Republican, said, there'll be some funding for Ukraine, the guy from the UK says, how much? And I stopped right there and I said, and that's the problem. Because all you're saying is how much. Nobody is talking about what the goal is. What is the end game here? Because we, as a group, are willing to support it as long as we have a strategy and define what we're trying to achieve. And that's what we do in this booklet that I'm showing you, Brian, right now, addressing the Ukraine funding debate. And it's Congressman Mike Garcia. It's me. It's Jack Bergman, retired general. Dan Crenshaw, those names. August Pfluger, Jen Kiggins, all members of Congress that are veterans and have been to war. And we spell out where we think some funding should go with a result, which is getting Russia out of Ukraine, making Russia regret that they ever did this, and at the same time developing a sovereign Ukraine, which Russia agreed 2 years ago. So that's just the Ukraine front. Now you got Israel. And obviously this is one of the most disgusting things. Brian, I've described it as one of the worst things I've seen since the Holocaust. But at least the Germans were trying to hide it. And now you've got this going on, and you've got the foreign minister of Iran at the UN saying that Israel is conducting genocide. Actually, if you look at what they're doing right now, they are trying to be surgical and take a precision approach to what they hope to do in Gaza, which is defeat Hamas with very few civilian casualties, whereas Hamas went for civilians immediately.
Pause for a moment. We'll bring Congressman Wenstrup back. Clearly, we are not done with the topic of wars, plural, sad as it may be. 8:30 on a Friday, and a happy one to you. Hope you have some good plans this weekend. I'm enjoying my conversation with Congressman Brad Wenstrup. Despite the depressing nature of the conversation, we're talking about war, and we got to do a little bit more on that. I just have to pester you on this one, Congressman, before we move on with the other items you want to get to. You said we need to have some clear vision with Ukraine, and you said we need to get Russia out of Ukraine. Doesn't that mean we get into a war with you? How Russia's not going to pull the plug. They are not going to eat crow on this. They are not going to lose face over this. Vladimir Putin is not a lose face kind of guy. I think he'll fight this thing until the bitter end. That's my impression.
No, that's my impression as well. Maybe it doesn't end well for him. Kind of like being Speaker of the House. It usually doesn't end well. But in his situation, there may be some form of humiliation that needs to be part of this. So I don't know, Brian. Maybe it's not the exact same borders that it was, or something like that. He's going to demand
some kind of concession.
Yeah, he's going to have something to save face if he is still in power.
Right.
But let's define that. Let's have Zelensky and Biden administration define what that might be. And say what will get you to the table, for example. What will even get you to the table on this?
Well, the retort would be, you don't reveal your hand ahead of time, what your expectations are, what you're willing to compromise on. The starting volley is get the hell out of the existing Ukrainian borders, including Crimea. You throw that in as well. And then you start negotiating backward from there, because they're going to say, no, we get all of Crimea and we get all of Ukraine, or, this half, or it's a negotiation. So it's easy. All I'm saying is it's easy to say, and I'm listening to my listeners out there going, but what does that mean? What do you mean get Russia out of Ukraine? That's the same question I have. It gets more complicated after you come up with what you're hoping for.
Yeah, but I mean, right now we're just saying as long as it takes, and the problem is as long as what takes. So if you say, well, our goal would be to get Russia out of there and to have a sovereign Ukraine and then a peaceful region, right? That would be the goal. Will that happen? I don't know, but you at least have to set the goal and drive towards it in hopes that Russia regrets their action and that some kind of agreement can be met.
Okay. Now, there were a couple other things you wanted to bring up relative to the Middle East situation. I think. Well,
it's going to Israel. You were asking me offline about a resolution, and the resolution. What does that really mean?
Yeah, the resolution that was passed the other day almost unanimously. There were about 6 or 10 holdouts. Some voted, present. Some said no, and of course, the ones that said no are the Ilhan Omar types. They are all very, very pro-Palestine. So, I guess my point is, does a resolution really mean anything? Does it do anything?
For morale, I'd say, and a show of strength and a show of support, which means a lot. I mean, typically, Brian, if someone says America is behind us, that comes with a lot of gravitas. I don't know that it does right now under this administration, but understand when you say Congress is behind it. Look, there is a reason, Brian, that all of these countries, yesterday I met with the Italians and the Italians from their intelligence community. And what's important to them is that they have a relationship with the U.S. intelligence community, that we are working together as democracies, that we try to make ourselves stronger, just a sort of a sidebar to NATO, if you would. It's important to those countries that they know they have the support of the American Congress and the American White House.
Pivoting over to the other side of the globe, South China Sea, all the interactions we've been having with the Chinese military, the Philippines are now being threatened. We have a defense obligation with the Philippines, unlike Taiwan. If Taiwan were to be invaded, and I actually think that's probably more likely than not, given the current administration and how bogged down we are in the four corners of the world, the time looks right for China to go ahead and pull the trigger before the next election. That's just, I know my tea leaf readings, sphincters, everybody's got one. Yeah. But if the Philippines were to become engaged, and it's looking more and more like they are, given the actions of China and their claims of power of property rights and ocean rights, we owe them a defense obligation. We'll have to send boots on the ground, right?
Well, I don't know about that per se, but I will tell you that what things I've been trying to do as I work that region. I have been in Vietnam twice within the last year, and I've been to Australia several times, but my most recent trip about a month or so ago was to Australia, Vietnam, and Japan. And trying to make sure, and they're wanting this, that their military can be as strong as it can possibly be. They all want to defend their sovereignty against China. And that's really the bottom line in that region. So Philippines, so next it's like Solomon Islands, Philippines. where else can we go to make sure that we are building these relationships? And in that region, Australia can have influence on some of the smaller nations in the region. Vietnam can have special influence on, like, Cambodia, Laos, and then Japan as well. And so we want to exploit all of those opportunities where the relationships may be stronger, so that we are sort of more of a covert but NATO type of alliance in the region, which includes the Philippines. And that's one of the places I want to get to next. We have turned the tide there in many ways, because there was a while back, not too long ago, where Philippines was drifting away from a relationship with the United States and democracy. China likes to come into these places, and they make nice things for their leader. They make nice offerings to the leader, but it's not necessarily good for their people. And we're trying to point that out and get them on our side.
More with Congressman Wenstrup. Spending bills included among the topics. Be right back. Coming up at 8:41, 55 Care City Talk Station. In studio, Congressman Brad Wenstrup. Make sure you go to the Vietnam anniversary, the withdrawal from Vietnam 50 years ago. And that's taking place tomorrow at Gates of Heaven Cemetery. Congressman Brad Wenstrup, keynote speaker there. Details, 55KRC.com. You're running out of time for the spending bills. Don't look at your watch. I'm talking about the spending bills. You got a window of opportunity here, or the government's going to shut down. Oh, my God, we're all going to die. I understand, though, you got a couple of spending bills through this the other day.
Well, we did get energy and water appropriations done yesterday. And as you might imagine, considering we were in Washington the last few weeks, but not able to bring bills to the floor because we didn't have a speaker. Although our next 2 weeks were supposed to be here in the district, we will be back in Washington to do exactly that, try to move our appropriations bills, get them over to the Senate, and get this job done.
Okay. Any cuts? Are we looking at something that's fiscally responsible, at least or at least comparatively so?
Oh yeah, I'm not on appropriations, but I've been able to.
Well, I figure you have the inside skinny.
Yeah, pretty much do, Brian. But I've taken a look at some of the cuts, and coming out of committee, there's a lot of serious cuts, and we'll it's always a different story once it goes to the Senate, and I get that, we all understand that, but we got to put our stake in the sand, if you will, and
the only opportunity to cut is in the House right now,
because it has to happen, and so that's how you bargain, right? But so I think we're starting pretty strong with a lot of the cuts that are being recommended through appropriations.
All right. Well, I just don't want any more green stuff in there. I saw the automakers are starting to wake up to the cold, harsh reality that no one wants EVs.
Well, they're being more public about it.
Yeah, they are.
Because they've certainly talked to us privately about it.
Well, that's kind of one of the reasons I brought it up, because you guys know in advance, because I can hear, if you're with Ford, you're going to have access to some of the congressional elected officials. That's bottom line, because you're big and you've got money and you spend on campaigns. So you got the ear. You go to them and say, no one is buying these. You guys need to quit pushing them down our throats, because our money is being made on the trucks and the SUVs and the internal combustion engines. I can't get these cars off of my lot. They're not even ordering them anymore at lots. And in order to sell one, they have to sell them at a big loss. I mean, you can't make up for that in volume, Congressman.
Well, there's so many components of why people don't want them. If it's your second car or third car, maybe, okay, that sounds pretty cool then, right?
And you got to have fat bank to have multiple cars, one of being an EV.
Right, but if this is your one mode of transportation, you are now dependent on China, because we may assemble batteries here and we've got some plants coming up. That's great, but we don't make the ingredients that go into it. We don't have the processing for the ingredients that go into it. So you're relying on China. Do you want that? There was a area in my district along the river further east, and they said, "Oh, Congressman, we need some charging stations here so tourists can come through here and charge their cars." And I said, I don't want to make any American dependent on China for their mode of transportation, and so I don't want to aid and abet that right now. If you want to do it as a second or third car as a luxury, well, you're taking a risk. We already take a risk when it comes to us not drilling anymore and not producing our own oil the way that we should be.
Congressman Brad Wenstrup, real quick here, as to China, and in the context of green, because I've had it up to my eyeballs with this green stuff, China does not participate in this crap. China is doing what it wants and what is good for China. They do not care about the concept of climate change, and I think they probably laugh behind the scenes at the idea that we even believe that it's happening, that we, human beings, are responsible for changing the temperature of the globe when it's happened so many damn times before. This has been a constantly ever-changing environment on the planet Earth. Now, putting all that crap aside, whether or not they believe in it, they're building new coal plants as we shut ours down and kneecap ourselves and cut our own throats on a suicide mission in terms of energy production.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure I went to grade school with people that are Democrats today, and I remember that we learned that the Earth goes around every 24 hours. So what goes on there matters.
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, it is interesting, and the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Association, a federal agency, came out and said after a 40-year study from 1980 to 2020 that as Asia pollutes more, there's more of a screen between the sun and the ocean, and therefore it's actually cooled the oceans there, and they have fewer hurricanes and storms. But over the Atlantic, where North America has the influence, we've cleaned up a lot of things, and now it's actually warmer, increasing hurricanes and storms. But God forbid, I brought that up in committee, and one of the Democrats, not in front of camera, said, we probably should talk about these scientific facts.
Yeah, it would be nice if we brought real science into the equation as opposed to the padded scientific studies that they put forth justifying their existence. In other words, that whole green, environmental, the business side of it. They need us to be dumb and complacent so they can continue to make literally billions of dollars by being handpicked by the government to do the green projects that they're doing.
Everybody wants clean air, clean water, let's face it, and if we can get less expensive forms of energy that are reliable, we'll go for it. But the free market takes care of it.
Yeah, it does. And the word reliability is key in that conversation. 846, coming at 847. One more with Congressman Brad Wenstrup. Coming up at 8:51 at 55 KRCD Talk Station. Remember, when you can't listen live, podcast, 55KRC.com. Great conversation with Alfred Nippert Jr. this morning. He's a railroad lawyer all over that issue 22 and a bunch of reasons why it looks like probably getting the shaft in that deal. $1.6 billion ain't quite enough by a long shot. Anyway, Congressman Wenstrup, we got one more segment in here, and this COVID committee, I was curious about this, and I know you have information on it. I mean, aren't we through COVID? I mean, only 3% of the entire United States population has bothered to get this booster, which they're really pushing hard. People have lost confidence in the booster. A lot of my listeners, for example, are really worried about maybe the downside effects of even getting a COVID vaccine or booster. So what's this COVID committee all about?
Well, it's a combination of things that I've been working on, and so maybe I'm in the right place, maybe not. But being on Intelligence Committee, I started looking at COVID once it began and we're in lockdown, looking to see how we could actually treat patients because we didn't have a treatment and a defined treatment, and we didn't have a test. So got very much involved with that, and then leading into the creation of chimeras or gain of function, super viruses, bioweapons. So there's my work on Intelligence Committee the last few years. And then we have the select subcommittee on the pandemic where we're looking at everything, like the things that we passed in Congress. Did they work? Were they helpful? What about all the fraud that took place? But also origins of COVID, and trying to create a path forward so we might be able to predict the next pandemic, prepare ourselves for it, or maybe even prevent it. But protect ourselves. So that's very encompassing. And then we have the Doctors Caucus, where we're looking at all the stuff that CDC did, the FDA did, and the processes there. So it's very encompassing. It's consuming a lot of my time, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be involved with all of this and try and get us in the right direction.
Well, you're a doctor, so it stands to reason you're a logical person to at least be involved in something that involves the human body and medicine. But insofar as how all this worked, I mean, you did point out on the fraud part, this seemed like never let a good crisis go to waste time. They threw so much money. I think about the money the city of Cincinnati got. It it paid off a lot of the debt that they had. New York City, way underwater with debt. And they probably are still now, but it helped alleviate that. It was almost as if we need this money for COVID, and really the answer was, well, we need this money to pay down all this debt that the Democrat cities have dug themselves into.
Yeah. And part of the things we've been looking at is, where did the money go?
Yeah.
And you find out it went toward green projects, woke projects, and things like that. Obviously, very inappropriate. But on the side,
no oversight.
Well, and we're trying to provide some, but there was none built in. And not only that, for the unemployment, for example, it was self-attestation. You just said it. You didn't have to prove anything.
I know.
And that's where the fraud went into the billions, most of it going out of the country.
Well, I mean, nobody thought of that going in? I mean, geez,
yeah, we did. We actually
Louise.
did. We actually did, Brian. And we fought against it, but we didn't have control of the House at the time, or the Senate, and that's what happened. But coming to the medical side, we're really pushing. We have even had a hearing on it. The doctor-patient relationship. This is between you and your doctor. And doctors have to be educated on what the boosters are capable of doing and understand where you are. So, for example, I was told I needed a booster to go to Germany for a security conference. But I said, let's check my antibodies and T cells. Well, they couldn't do T cells. But a strong number of antibodies was 40. Mine was 821. Why? Because I had been vaccinated and I got COVID. We have to be honest about what actually happens, who's at risk. Understand that the vaccine almost is more like a treatment where you don't get as sick, but you can still get it.
Well, and a lot of people were looking for ivermectin, and it's proven itself. I have friends that went through COVID, and they took ivermectin. It went away in no time. We got it's a horse pill. Don't take it. Don't take it. Don't take it. I think my final analysis, to sum it up like this, since we're running out of time, I'm thinking they blew it. They have burned up any trust that they had with the American people. You with me on that?
Absolutely, and we're trying to reestablish it, but it only can come with transparency and honesty, and that's what we're going to be able to reveal. We've got the stuff. I mean, you cannot believe the internal conversations going on within these agencies. For example, people saying, and it's not just agencies, it's Fauci's scientific friends. They say, well, we know China is capable of doing this, and they're doing this type of research that can create this super virus, but we're going to say it came from nature. And here's a quote: "My job is to disprove the lab leak theory." This is from the same person who 3 days or so before said to Fauci, this thing looks engineered.
All right. Well, and the big question, we'll just leave with this: why was it so important to ignore the lab as a possibility?
Thank you very much.
8:56. Congressman Brad Wenstrup, thank you so much for what you're doing. Good luck at the Gate of Heaven Cemetery tomorrow at 2 o'clock for the salute to Vietnam veterans. Get the information, 55KRC.com.